Good evening, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Today is Saturday, and we begin with the plagues, and there are 10 of them. I'm not very sure whether we will complete all the 10 today. Definitely not the 10th one, but we will definitely cross the halfway mark. That is, get into the theme of the plagues. And remember, these plagues are redemptive for Israel. At the same time, it is destructive for the oppressive power represented by Pharaoh and the Egyptians, the magicians, and the emissaries of Pharaoh. That is, uh, get to the text of the Bible. I will share the screen and we will read from a particular passage, which is a theme for the entire um, the plague. Okay, I'll share the screen. Yes. Exodus 9:1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go, so that they may worship me." We will particularly highlight a couple of phrases here. Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews. We are not familiar with this expression in the Bible. God of the Hebrews. Secondly, let my people go. Let my people go. And the third phrase, so that they may worship me. See, throughout these incidents of plague, the so-called plague story, God repeatedly tells Moses to remind Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go. Let my people go. And already here at the beginning of the plagues, God has made them his people. Let my people go. Although it is on Mount Sinai, when he makes the covenant, officially he will declare Israelites as his own people. You shall be my people, and I will be your God. Uh, but already at the beginning of the plagues, repeatedly God says, "Let my people go." Then another phrase that a phrase that does not come too often is the God of the Hebrews. I mentioned once Yahweh is like a private God of the Jewish people, Yahweh, while Elohim is a universal God. So here uh, the title is given as God of the Hebrews. And the purpose why the Pharaoh should allow them to go, it's because they should worship Yahweh. Okay, so the closeness with which the relationship that exist between this new God, the God of the Hebrews and the people of Israel. That's what we are going to see throughout the events of the plagues. Okay, just to highlight our study, never forget the two root experiences: Exodus from Egypt, Revelation at Mount Sinai, and we are still in preparation for this Exodus from Egypt. Now, I continue from where we stopped yesterday regarding the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues. In the Old Testament, as in the New Testament, the miracles have a different meaning than just what is extraordinary. Don't be carried away by anything that is extraordinary. That is not the purpose of biblical events. In fact, Bible rarely uses the word miracle. Instead, constantly it uses the phrase signs and wonders. Signs and wonders. Signs are pointers to the revelation of God. The signs, the visible evidence of the presence and purpose of God in history. I concluded yesterday's class with this statement. They believed, the Israelites believed, that any event, ordinary or extraordinary, could be a sign of his will and activity. Any event, ordinary or extraordinary, could be a sign of his will and activity. Throughout this Exodus event, whether it is in the plague or the crossing of the sea or their life in the wilderness, we are going to see a series of what I have highlighted on the slide: extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. I repeat, extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. What do you mean by this statement? Extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. Many of these events can be explained either naturally or scientifically. Ordinary events that can come at any time. But there is an extraordinariness. They occur. They come together, concurrence. They come together at an extraordinary time. So the ordinary events come together at a very particular, extraordinary time. So that makes this as extraordinary signs and wonders. And that particular time was crucial and important in the life of Israel. So please keep this in mind. Many of these events that take place in the book of Exodus are extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. With this introduction, we get into the plagues. The first is the turning the Nile into blood, the pollution of Nile, turning the Nile into blood. The traditional sign of trouble in ancient Egyptian literature, Nile turning red. So let's get into the story of the narration of the plagues. So yesterday we saw the preparation already began with Aaron uh, throwing the staff, and the staff became a snake. So the drama is already set, and together with Aaron, the magicians of Egypt did the same secret art, and their rods also became snakes. However, Aaron's staff swallowed up the snakes of Egyptian magicians. Unfortunately, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He remained as stubborn as ever. And now begins the story. Verse 14 of chapter 7. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. And that begins the story of the first plague. So Moses was to meet Pharaoh at the river bank with a challenge to Egyptian existence. But Nile is going to turn red. Nile is going to be polluted. Nile is believed to be the source and life and fertility. What does the Bible say about this first plague? The theology is this: God fights the Egyptians on their own term in order to show the Israelites the ultimate source of magic is not Moses or Aaron, that God is the one who fights the Egyptians. Egyptian magicians are powerful and strong, but God makes use of Moses and Aaron, as we see in verse 17. Verse 17. Reason is, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. The purpose of these plagues is to prove that Yahweh is the Lord and not Pharaoh and not the Egyptian pantheon, the gods of Egypt. Let's get into the text. We have three traditions, all the three traditions in this text. JE coming together and the P tradition. The clue is there. Uh, when Moses uses the staff, it comes from JE combined tradition. Whenever Aaron is the protagonist, when Aaron uses the staff to perform a miracle, we now know it is from the priestly writer. So the readers or listeners can already make a distinction between the JE tradition and the P tradition. and which is dominant at different stages of the text. Okay, let's quickly look at the JE text. It's the staff of Moses in verse 17 will make the water turned into blood after Moses strikes the water with the staff. The result, the Nile. The Nile is the river. The river will be affected. That leads to general death of the fish and the subsequent pollution. When all the fish are dead, the Nile, the entire river, will be polluted. Instead, the priestly writer gives importance to the staff of Aaron, as in verse 19. Aaron is to stretch out his hand over the waters of Egypt with a staff and over its rivers, not just the Nile alone. The P writer is more solemn and more extensive. So the effect is not just on the river Nile, but on all rivers, all canals, all its ponds, and all its pools of water, so that they may become blood. There shall be blood throughout the whole land of Egypt, even, even in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So, whatever or whichever vessel that contains water, liquid, be turned into blood according to the priestly writer. Let's see the implication of the term uh, Nile turning into blood. See, we have a number of references from extra biblical literature, that outside Bible, in the ancient Egyptian literature, that speaks of Nile or the river turning blood. There is a text from Admonitions of Ipuwer. It is an Egyptian wisdom text which is quoted like this: the river is blood, as one drinks from it, one thirsts for water. So I already mentioned from the theological perspective, it's Yahweh performing this miracle on behalf of Israel to liberate them and to prove that Yahweh is the Lord. Now, as I already mentioned, there are natural explanations possible. So it's up to the reader to take it or leave it. Absolutely, there is one is free. You take it or leave it. But today, the modern commentators and scholars will point out that these explanations can uh, be natural, but within this natural explanation, the hand of God is prominent, predominant. Yahweh does it. Okay, what is the natural explanation? River Nile's reddish appearance in the summer months due to the reddish particles of soil flowing to Egypt from Sudan. You know, the summer rain brings the water into the land of Egypt through Nile, passing through the reddish um, places, uh, mineral with the minerals and soil, and they come bring into Nile, the water in the reddish color is attested even in the modern times. Uh, the Egyptian magicians were able to match the feat performed by Moses and Aaron. So that is why I am saying that it could be explained naturally. It says that what Moses and Aaron could do, the Egyptian magicians could also do. Now, the initial plagues were not understood as supernatural, as they were within the power of superior magicians. The magicians of Egypt, of Pharaoh, were able to perform these. That's why we shall not literally call them as supernatural, as they were able to perform. But there were other things that that only Moses and Aaron, through the power of God, could do. The Egyptian texts record tricks of legendary magicians. So, turning of water into blood is a common Middle Eastern theme, because it is not something that has happened once in the entire history of the world. There were many times this water was turned into blood. Okay. The scene of Moses and Aaron versus the Egyptian magicians highlights the question as to whether God of Pharaoh is more powerful and who is more divine. See, Pharaoh is considered God, he is divinized. So the story of the plagues will prove that there is someone who is greater than Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is not divine, but Yahweh is divine, and he has control over not only over Israel but over Egypt as well. There. Another aspect that I would like to highlight: these various plagues simply, imply a polemic against Egyptian deities and Egyptian polytheism in general. I repeat, the story of the plagues imply a polemic against Egyptian deities and Egyptian polytheism in general. The reason is this: Egypt had one of the largest and most complex pantheons of gods of any civilization in the ancient world. So, Egypt was known for its multiplicity of gods. I'm not going to spend time on all the details, but I want uh, 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 to state that Nile, River Nile, is an Egyptian deity, and the life of Egyptians depended in and around this Nile, because Nile is the source of their sustenance, their livelihood, source of their life. So the ancient Egyptian goddess Anuket was a personification of Nile, and she was called as the nourisher of the fields. Um, Happy, the name of a god, was the god of the annual flooding of the Nile. in ancient Egypt. So the flooding of Nile resulted in the fertility of the area because the flood deposited rich silt on the river's banks. Uh, at the beginning of any rainy season, when Nile is inundated, it was a common practice to offer sacrifice for the goddess river goddess, river Nile. And that's the reason, that's the context in which Moses is waiting for Pharaoh, who will come to offer sacrifice, because at the end of the flood, when both the banks of river Nile are flooded, Pharaoh will come to offer sacrifice to this river goddess. I will read from 15 to 17 verses. Uh, Go to Pharaoh in the morning, God is telling Moses, as he is going out to the water, stand by at the river bank to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that was turned into a snake. So this is the context. Because of the flooding, Pharaoh is scheduled to come to the river bank to offer sacrifice. And that's the time Moses is to encounter Pharaoh. Verse 16, say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Throughout the stories of the plagues, you will come across this statement repeatedly used. Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. Ironically, the life giving Nile becomes the source of death. With this account of the first plague, what does the biblical author tell us? He tells us that river Nile is not divine as the Egyptians believed, but Nile is just an instrument in the hand of God. God has created it, and the water of Nile obeys the command of God. The Nile is just an instrument in the hand of God, and is not a god or a goddess, and it is not divine. Okay. Um, in this, as we conclude this first plague, there is no casualty, no major casualty. Okay, the fish died. There is a pollution of the Nile, but no human being died. The Egyptians overcame this plague by digging new wells around the river Nile. I would once again highlight the fact that the three accounts, or rather the three traditions, J and E together as one tradition, let's put it, and the other tradition P. So the P tradition will really dramatize this occasion to say that all the sources of water in Egypt, it's canals and ponds and pools and rivulets, and even water containers of wood and stones, they all turned into red. But J and E tradition, they are that is more sober. That's the reason why they are able to dig wells around the river Nile, and they get potable water that is drinkable. Okay, that takes us to the second plague, chapter 7, 25 to chapter 8, 15. Uh, I would ask you to take your, I'll like to draw your attention to the uh, reference. Those of you who are following the NRSV or ESV Bible, uh, you'll see chapter 8 begins with a note because Exodus chapter 7 in Hebrew has 729 verses. In your English version, it has only 25 verses. So 26th verse in Hebrew text is chapter 8 verse 1 in our English text. So there is a difference of a few verses that will go till the end of chapter 8. From chapter 9 onwards, it will be once again synchronized. The English and Hebrew numbering will be once again same. Okay, this is just to let you know. So 8, chapter 8, verse 1 in Hebrew will be chapter 7, 26. Okay. And chapter 8, verse 5 in English will be chapter 8, verse 1 in Hebrew. Okay, this is just an information. Now, there is a gap of 7 days. So, 7 days after the first plague, Yahweh sent Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh again to inflict the second plague. The second plague consists of frogs. Even here in this chapter 2, we find the presence of both JE and P. When Aaron stretched out his staff over the waters of Egypt, the story tells us that frogs came up and covered the entire land of Egypt. The episode reveals that the Egyptian magicians are still able to match the feats performed by Moses and Aaron. They are in par with the performance of Moses and Aaron. But there are differences. The Pharaoh actively seeks out the intercession of Moses. We'll read verse 15. Moses, when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he uh, he hardened his heart and would not listen to him, just as the Lord had said. No, the sorry, it's in verse 8, chapter 8, verse 8, that Pharaoh seeks the intercession of Moses. It says, pray to the Lord to take away the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Then he repeated uh, uh, this intercession, you know, that he wanted to be liberated from this menace of the frogs. Okay. So that's the main difference. Although Moses and Aaron, uh, or rather, the magicians of Egypt match the performance of Moses and Aaron, Pharaoh actively seeks the intercession of Moses. Unfortunately, as usual, he remains stubborn and adamant till the end of the story. In the second play, God seems to be demanding more than the first account. What is the greater thing that God is asking? You may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. At the request of Pharaoh, Moses prayed to God, and the frogs were removed. And the story repeats. Pharaoh is adamant again. We will do a rereading of this text. As I mentioned, you can take it or leave it. This is to let us know from the pages of the scholars, they state that there could be a rereading of this story, a natural explanation, which could be also logical. It is this: this plague may have been inspired by frogs known to invade the land during the Nile's inundation in September and October. At the end of the flood, you water stagnates, and frogs invade the land. And this is attested by different ancient writers. This is the result of the first plague. The first plague sets off a chain of reaction. The the floods, after the fouling of the Nile, the frogs invade the land in massive proportions. And interestingly, there is a statement, verse 3, chapter 8. The Nile shall swarm with frogs. And some biblical scholars will find a connection. They will say, see, this punishment against Egyptians who originally wanted to kill Israelites in chapter 1, verse 7, Israelites who were fruitful and who fill the land. We saw in the first few chapters the suppression and the oppression, suppression and oppression of the people of Israel by Pharaoh and the people. So now what happens? Now the Nile is full of frogs, a punishment against the Egyptians. Okay, we come to the third plague, uh, chapter 8, 16 to 19, the gnats. This was brought about when Aaron struck the dust of the earth, and gnats engulfed man and the beast. Uh, any of you listening to me and looking and realizing the role of Aaron in this story will immediately note that this comes from the priestly writer, key writer. Why? Aaron is playing the major role. Even Moses is not present there. The sense that Moses and Aaron are not doing together. J and E tradition will bring Moses and Aaron together and Moses playing the major role. But in this story, verse 16, the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, Aaron is going to be the hero. Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth. It may become gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. And it's so. So the story tells us that when Aaron struck the dust of Egypt, the dust became gnats and engulfed man and the beast. So far, the second plague affected the people, so the whole land of Egypt, and gnats came on humans and animals alike. All the dust of the earth turned into gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. I already mentioned that P writer can exaggerate. An example is this: all the dust of the earth turned into gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. Uh, the Egyptian magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but this time they could not match Aaron. So Egyptian magicians tried and failed. Let's go to the re-reading of this text. Okay. Please keep this in mind that according to the Bible, all these acts are the acts of God. They are performed through the instrumentality of Moses and Aaron. And we are trying to see a natural reading, a possible natural reading also, keeping in mind or extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. Why? At this time, these natural things take place. Yes. So this concurrence is brought out by God. Okay. Now coming back to the story, this the presence of gnats may have been suggested by mosquitoes reproducing quickly in pools of water left by the Nile following its inundation. See, after the flood, the pools and the lakes and small bodies of water are left and they produce a lot of mosquitoes because that becomes the breeding space for mosquitoes. The P writer likes exaggeration, I mentioned. Dust turning into gnats. The picture evokes the image of a dust storm transforming into gnats. That's the image that we get from the priestly writer. Whatever it is, the sovereignty of Yahweh God is proclaimed by the magicians, and that is in the statement, verse 19. This is the finger of God. This is the finger of God. The magicians are coming to report to Pharaoh that this miraculous event is performed by Yahweh Himself. They come from the finger of God. Uh, okay. In the plague, the fourth plague, which is in chapter 8, verse 20 to 32, Uh, the plagues are the flies. Flies. In fact, in fact, in many of the commentators place the third and fourth plagues together, the gnats and flies. I will mention about this later. Okay, now let's go to the text of this fourth plague. So Moses and Aaron brought swarms of flies to all of Egypt except on Goshen, where the people of Israel lived. See, um, how so far we have seen the plagues affected the entire Egypt. Now, the place where the people of Israel reside, that is the Goshen area, not affected. Pharaoh asked Moses and Aaron to offer sacrifice in the land of Egypt. Just take you back to the map that we have seen already. The land of Goshen. See, Israel. The picture is Israel is here to the north east of Egypt, northeast of Egypt. Oh, so Jerusalem can be placed, can be seen here. Jerusalem, the Mediterranean Sea, and this area is south of Israel is Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula. Mm, Sinai Peninsula is here. You can see. Then Goshen is this area. So this we from Genesis we saw that Joseph managed to get this particular place, Goshen, for Jacob and his sons. They would settle down here, in a way, little away from the rest of the Egyptians, because they had cattle and sheep farming, and the shepherds were abominable to the Egyptians and so on. So they were like, and this was a fertile area. See, the river Nile flows into two places. Finally, it reaches the Mediterranean. So this place was very fertile. That was the place given to the sons of Jacob by Pharaoh at the time of Joseph, the Goshen area. Now, when the story takes place in Exodus, the fourth plague, account of the fourth plague tells us that the plague did not affect where the Israelites stayed, the Goshen area. Okay. Um, okay, another map of Goshen. Um, yeah, fine. Back to the text. Okay. Here, um, the Pharaoh asked Moses and Aaron to offer sacrifice in the land of Egypt. Uh, Moses insisted that Pharaoh allow the people 3 days journey into the wilderness. Um, why is that? Reason is given there. Okay, I'll come back to that. Pharaoh agreed to send them to the wilderness, but they should not go far. They should not go far. Um, and secondly, they should intercede to God for Pharaoh. We see that in verse 28. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, provided you do not go very far away. Secondly, pray for me. Oh, it's interesting. Uh, Pharaoh is asking, divinized Pharaoh is asking Moses to pray for him, asking that the Lord should bless Pharaoh. Then Moses said, as soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from of his officials, and from his people. Only do not let Pharaoh again deal falsely by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So the result is that Moses prayed and the plague was removed. The swarms of flies left Pharaoh from officials from the people. And Bible says tells us that not one remained. Unfortunately, unfortunately, the story repeats. Pharaoh again reneged and withdrew his permission. He continued to be stubborn and adamant. Okay, let's go to the, okay, continue with this story of the fourth plague. Egyptians in this story are physically very close to the Hebrews. That's why they are allowed to view the sacrifice offered by the Hebrews. Although previously I said the Goshen area was in a way, at least at the time of Joseph and early descendants of Jacob, was a reserved kind of a reserved place for the Israelites. And but at least at this part of the story, the Egyptians are able to view the sacrifice offered by the Hebrews. And Moses was not keen on offering sacrifice at the vicinity because he said Egyptians would not consider this sacrifice of Israelites as something that is pleasing because animal sacrifice was abhorrent. It would upset the religious sensitivities of the Egyptians. It is offensive to them because animals had a conspicuous place in Egyptian religion. And I believe that Egyptians did not resort to killing of animals for the sake of sacrifice. Like let's say the Israelites who had stipulations of sacrifices. You know, when you read the first seven chapters of Leviticus, which will tell us clearly of different types of sacrifices, and among them are also animal sacrifices consisting of rams and bulls and lambs and goats and cattle and ox. In this fourth account of the plague, Pharaoh is to admit that Yahweh is present in Egypt. So Yahweh is not just a God only of Israel, but He is also the God of Egypt as well. Okay. And another interesting part of the story that we notice here that Moses is to pray on behalf of the mighty ruler of Egypt. You know, Moses is sorry, Pharaoh is a divinized ruler, but surprisingly, Pharaoh is asking Moses to pray. and that shows um, the helplessness of the so-called divinized Pharaoh. Okay. Um, okay. The rereading of this plague, the fourth plague, Psalm 78:45 speaks only of insects placed in matching poetic lines with the frogs, while Psalm 105, I mentioned these two Psalms in yesterday's class, the other day's class. So Psalm 105, verse 31, speaks of flies and gnats in matching poetic lines, suggesting that these two plagues together represented a single plague. See, Psalm 78 speaks of six plagues. Sometimes, if you calculate, it can also become seven, but not more than seven. Psalm 105 narrates or enumerates seven plagues and not 10 plagues. So they seem to, at least Psalm 105 puts two together. In fact, they, in many other accounts, 3 and 4 go together. So that's considered as a single plague in certain accounts. In ancient times, from ancient times, the stinging of gnats or mosquitoes have plagued, stinging gnats or mosquitoes plagued Egypt, especially in the autumn after the floods. The Nile, receding from its overflow, leaves stagnant pools of water in which the insects breed. Now, in the we go to the fifth plague, chapter 9, verse 1 to 7. It is called the cattle plagues. It is called the cattle plagues. It comes from the two accounts of J and P. There is no negotiation in this plague between Moses and Pharaoh, as Pharaoh did not act within the given time. All the cattle of the Egyptians were killed by the plague inflicted by Yahweh. Instead, the cattle of Israelites were safe. There is already the protection of Yahweh reserved to the cattle of Israelites, while that of Egyptians were killed. Now, when you go to the prophet Habakkuk, chapter 3, verse 5, pestilence is personified. The pestilence personified here appears as one of the Lord's destructive agents. The pestilence is sent by Yahweh as one of the destructive agents, and the pestilence is regarded as the smiting of God's hand. In the ancient world, diseases are described as the hand of destructive deities. No wonder why the Egyptians say, oh, this is from the hand, the finger of God, the hand of God. The pestilence is considered as as coming from destructive deities to punish human beings. Today, it can be considered as anthrax. Hmm? We have seen in recent times epidemics or virus or bacteria or not virus, bacterial disease of animals, especially of cattle and sheep. And recent times we have heard of this disease, and it is since it is a kind of an epidemic, contagious, which will affect the entire herd of animals. They all have to be killed if they are infected, because they will contaminate not just the animal kingdom but also the human beings that are connected to it. So these anthrax could have resulted from conditions created by the insects after the inundation. We already seen the frogs, the insects, the gnats, the mosquitoes, and they would have contributed to the spread of this bacterial disease or anthrax. So Egypt was further punished um, by the in the okay. This is the next plague, the sixth plague, which is typically coming from the priestly writer. The chapter 9, verse 8 to 12. Um, this Egypt was further punished. Egypt was further punished because Pharaoh could not keep up to the promise. Now, when you read chapter 9, verse 8, chapter 9, verse 8, we are going to face a problem. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from the kiln and let Moses throw it in the air in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become fine dust all over the land of Egypt, and shall cause festering boils on humans and animals throughout the whole land of Egypt. And then verse 10, so he did as it was told. Moses threw it in the air and caused festering boils on humans and animals. Now the problem is this. Let me take you back to the text of the previous plague. Okay, okay. Chapter 9, verse 6. And on the next day, the Lord did so. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of Israelites, not one died. That is a problem. If you take it literally, in the fifth plague, all the cattle, all the livestock, all the animals of the Egyptians died. Now, in sixth plague, we are again speaking of the animals. Okay, I'm not going to answer it now. Uh, if the I have just posed a question, if the previous plague killed all cattle, were there any beasts left in the land? Um, the first two afflict, we'll see this um, plague, the sixth plague. The first to afflict humans as well as livestock. The boils afflict the knees and legs, according to the book of Deuteronomy 28, verse 35. The boils may refer to skin inflammations. In fact, in Hebrew, literally it means boils, the word that is used to refer to or rather, the Hebrew word referring to the boils is to be hot. It refers to skin inflammations. And the NRSV text speaks of festering. So it suggests malignant fistulas that characterize anthrax. We just referred to the animal, the bacterial disease that affected the animals. Okay. Um, Let me just. So it is a sixth plague. Although it is what do you call Aaron who is going to be the hero, as coming from the priestly writer. Um, when comparing with other plagues where Moses functioned and Moses and Aaron function as a team, Aaron's role in this priestly account is minimal. So the story of the boils brings the Egyptian magicians back into the picture. But this time, they are not able to copy Moses and Aaron in creating the plague. Instead, for the first time, for the first time, they themselves are affected by the plague. So they are mentioned here, perhaps the perhaps caps the middle set of plagues 4, 5, 6. Just as the magician's special role in acknowledging God in the third plague provides a fitting climax to the first three plagues. So after this sixth plague, the magicians drop out of the narrative, because now we are not going to meet the magicians of Egypt after the sixth plague. Okay. Now, shall we take a pause, brother, if there are, because yesterday we had some questions to be answered, and we will take, and if there are, after completing, we will continue if there is time. Okay, pardon?
I have to check.
You will check.
Okay, okay. So, yep. So I'm not sure. I mean, I placed those questions. If those from the last class, if you had questions and they were not answered, maybe you could just message me again, and then I will ask those questions. Okay. Anyway, the first question is, why would God beg Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go rather than punishing the king at once? Why would God beg Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go rather than punishing the king at once?
Okay. Why would, actually, we just switch off. Actually, it is a command. Let my people go. Um, the punishment of Pharaoh will take place towards the end of the story with the killing of the firstborn of Egypt. The drama is set in motion with the first instance of the staff of Moses turning into a snake, later, the staff of Aaron turning into a snake. And then we are going to see a series of plagues. So I mentioned once, I think, if Pharaoh allowed Israel to go at the first instance, we would not be repeating the story of the Exodus. The punishment takes place at the end. Punishment of Pharaoh will be seen in the murder of the firstborn of Egypt. Okay.
Yeah. The next question. Um, on one hand, God asked Pharaoh to let his people go, but on the other hand, he hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why is that so?
I mentioned once that there are three ways of describing this aspect. Okay, Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Pharaoh hardened his heart, and his heart was hardened in the passive voice. In all the three instances, we have both the action of God and the freedom of Pharaoh, especially when it is said that Pharaoh hardened his heart. That is the freedom of Pharaoh. But when God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, it is to say that Pharaoh is an instrument in the hand of God in working out this salvation. So the situation will lead up to a climax in which, yeah, Pharaoh has to allow the exit of all the Egyptians. Or Pharaoh will be an instrument in leading the people out of Egypt, and of course crossing the sea and entry into the promised land and so on. So there is both God's action and the freedom of Pharaoh are in place.
Okay, the next question. Did the plagues happen on 10 consecutive days or was there a gap? How was it?
Yes, it's last almost, even if you take it literally, this might take almost 1 year. 1 year. See, it starts with the summer, the flood of August, Egyptian summer, the flood of August, and the frogs coming a month after September, October, and it will subsequently move to other months. And the 10th plague, the, the Passover will take place in the following spring. So there is a gap of almost 1 year. In fact, Bible literally said uh, the second plague took place 7 days after the first plague. That's what Bible, the text said. It does not take place in 7 days altogether. No, not they are. But historians would say, scholars would say, it would point out to 1 year's gap from summer, Egyptian summer to Egyptian spring. So from August to the following April.
Okay, the next question. Uh, yeah, the timing of the rereading of the first and second plague is are different. The first plague uh, rereading takes place on a summertime, while the frogs came out in September, October. Does it mean that the events do happen, but the timing of the event is extraordinary?
Yeah. As I said, you don't. The rereading is optional. Take it or leave it. But you know, after the flood, the floods may have remained for a few days or weeks. After that, the it will take some time for the breeding of the frogs. It takes time. So that would have taken a gap of a few weeks, almost a month. So I think there is a congruence. There is um, um, after the first plague, in a gap of maybe 4 weeks or a month, the second plague takes place. The frogs breed after the flood waters.
The next one, okay, yeah, it is difficult to accept the terms signs and wonders, especially when we go through the current situations like COVID. like natural calamities and all, how do we look at these as signs and wonders? How do we look at it as something positive? I think that's the idea of the question, big
Yes,
question.
definitely. See, depends on which side of the story where you stand. For Israelites, they are signs and wonders. These were their means of redemption. So we are reading it from the perspective of the Jewish people. The Bible is written by the Jewish people, and from their eyes of faith, and it is colored by their experience of Yahweh. So once at the introduction to the book of Exodus said, some people it will find it very difficult, very strange and bizarre in the modern time to see the violence, for example, violence violence against the Egyptians, you see. But let's see, we are reading it from the side of the Israelites. And for them, all these are means with which God saved them. Definitely for them, they are signs and wonders. I'm not coming into the connecting it with a pandemic of COVID. Um, People may have different views on that. I'm not going into detail right now because I don't want to
Okay,
go out of focus.
okay. Uh, the next question. Moses is also from the same priestly family. Then why is Aaron given importance by the P writer when Moses is also from the same family?
Yeah. Although both are from the same family, the role that Bible presents of Moses is prophetic. Moses as a prophetic figure, at least in the first 15 chapters of Exodus. You know, this was the final editing of this book of Exodus was done several centuries after the events took place. By the time priesthood was a prominent position. Priesthood enjoyed a prominent position in the life of Israel, and there were struggles, to have control over the priesthood of Jerusalem. There were different families, different groups, and in the New Testament also you will hear about the Zadokite priesthood and the Aaronite priesthood and so on. So there was a struggle. Uh, so to um, give validity to the priesthood through Aaron. Aaron is given prominence. The priesthood of Aaron is given prominence, and that is an indication that that comes from the priestly writer that gives prominence to Aaron as a priest.
Okay. Next question. In chapter 9, verse 6, if all the Egyptian livestock were killed, okay, 9 verse 20 and 21 says they were, I mean, 9 verse 6 says, if all Egyptian livestock were killed earlier, how could the slaves of Pharaoh bring their livestock in from the fields in 9 verse 20 and 21?
Yeah, that is a clear example of an inconsistency caused by the presence of two different tradition. Chapter 9, verse 6 is from J.E. tradition. The priestly tradition is silent there. Um, uh, Instead, from verse 8 onwards, it is from the priestly writer, no? From the priestly writer. So, priestly writer does not speak about the previous issue. So he starts with the animals directly. Okay, so it is not for priestly writer. This is not the continuation. This is not the continuation of the fifth plague. Okay, sixth plague is not the continuation of the plague. That's why I just mentioned Psalms, two Psalms that narrate the plagues. They keep these fifth and sixth together. Fifth and sixth plagues as one plague. Okay, that's the inconsistency is caused by the repetition by two different sources. Okay.
Okay. Next, I'll ask one question. I think I'll put two, three questions together, maybe just so that you can just finish up these questions. Um, so, yeah, the question is, one second. Yeah. Okay. Why did for the two questions I'll ask together? Why did God use the plagues to punish Pharaoh? And okay, in the modern day context, how would the it may seem how would the Egyptian people look at this particular passage? Like how would they see this passage? Yeah. So
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. You know, many years ago, I was in a community where there were also Egyptians, Egyptian confreres in my community. And in Italian language, when we recite that psalm, when Israel came out of Egypt, and then referring to the Egyptians as barbarous people. The translation is very badly placed in Italian there, or it looks very strange. So I would want, in fact, I used to look at these confrere, my friend, who would see this psalm, and referring to his people as an uneducated or barbarous or barbarian type. In English, it's not all that crude and rude. So when they look at it, they look at it negatively. It's like when two countries are on inimical terms. Um, the two country when country A, I don't want to mention the name. Okay, suppose country A is on inimical terms with the country B, but when the historian of A writes about the history, he will place the history of A in a very positive note and that of B in negative, and vice versa. When the author of country B writes about their history, they will highlight and give prominence to the nobility of country B and place country A in a darker shade. So too, this is what has happened in the Egypt. The Exodus story is narrated from the perspective of the Jewish people. So they have given a very bad okay, pictured Egypt in a real shady color. So normal Egyptian would see it, would consider not as an Israel would read the story. Yeah, they will see it negatively.
okay, the last question that I see for today. Uh, in chapter 7, verse 11, Aaron threw his staff and it became a snake. Uh, in chapter 7, verse 15, God said Moses to hold the staff, which turned into a snake. That means Moses was holding Aaron's staff. But in 7, verse 20, Aaron strikes the water of the river Nile with the staff. Whose staff is working wonders? Do they have the same staff?
Yeah, they must be having both the different staff. This whenever the priestly writer writes the story, he would give prominence to the staff of Aaron, the priestly writer. Jayi tradition will bring both Moses and Aaron, and it's Moses who performs the miracle. So the depends on the tradition. See later on, in the when the construction of Jerusalem takes place, when they have the holy of holies, they will place in the holy of holies a part of the staff of Aaron, together with the Ten Commandments, part of the manna from the wilderness when they traveled, and this Aaron's staff. So later, the priestly writer will consider this the staff of Aaron as a sacred relic.
Okay, so we have reached 7:30 now, so we'll conclude for today. I'm getting one or two questions, but maybe if you can ask at the beginning of the next class, like the same questions that you're asking me now, we will definitely answer those in the next class. So, thank you so much for making it today. Thank Father Shabu in a special way. He's been really busy these days, but he's really taken time out to prepare really well for these classes, a lot of time. And so we really thank Father for preparing for these classes and hope to see you next Thursday as we had this week. We shall conclude. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
You please come prepared for the coming class, reading up to chapter 15. And very interesting events are going to take place, the dramatic way by which the Lord delivers Israel. So please read at least